All right, so I am officially calling the meeting to order at 7 p.m. Can you do a roll call?
Chair Baskin?
Here.
Vice Chair Shu?
Here.
Commissioner Armstrong? Commissioner Brzezowski?
Here.
Commissioner Marcus?
Here.
Commissioner Schulte?
Here.
Commissioner Goss?
Here.
Councilmember Murphy? You have a quorum?
All right. Beautiful. So we have in front of us the February 8th meeting minutes, which I assume we have to approve. What is the official? Do I have a?
You don't have to approve it, you
Oh.
certainly can.
Oh, okay. Do we
Um,
want to, do I have a motion to approve?
There you go.
There's the word.
So moved.
Thank you. All right. Any discussion? All right.
I'm gonna call the roll.
Oh, I have to, can you call the roll?
Chair Baskin?
Oh, this is gonna be rough for a couple weeks.
You're gonna be fine.
You'll get it.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair Baskin?
Yes.
Vice Chair Shu?
Yes.
Commissioner Brzezowski?
Yes.
Commissioner Marcus?
Yes.
Commissioner Schulte?
Yes.
Commissioner Goss?
Yes.
Pass.
All right. So, Bob, I mistakenly did not put your topic on the new business, so after reports, I'll let you lead the way with that.
Okay.
But I guess, Jared, if you wanna start out from over there on
Sure.
reports from the commissions.
Yep. So the Smart Growth group met on February 13th. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we were gonna have two guests from, Kimley Horn. What's the name of the firm? They're a planning and engineering firm. So we had John Martin and Bonnie Von Olson come on to discuss downtown redevelopment, attracting housing downtown. It was a pretty open discussion, Q&A. Most of the time they wanted to learn about Oneonta. They weren't too familiar. So we spent quite a bit giving them some background, some statistics. So it was a good discussion. A couple things that came up was having adequate transportation to downtown and from downtown, having a business improvement district, downtown association. Those are just a few high-level things that we discussed. I think they'll be joining us at our next meeting. It's virtual on March 13th. That's all I got.
Cool,
Any
thank you.
questions?
I don't know if it really relates to housing, this input, but I really like the idea of a business improvement district downtown, so just putting my unofficial vote for that.
Me too.
Get in there, Jared. The Jared's.
So again, mine's gonna be short. We have the group this time. We're now just looking for a time and place to meet, looking for a schedule. It's been kind of an uphill battle to get both landlords, mine is the rental housing group, which is gonna get a new name shortly, so I don't know what to call it at the moment, but we're really trying to get a balance of landlords and non-landlords as to get a balanced cross-section of opinions. Of course, when we start to approach people, lots of landlords' hands shot up, obviously, but we thought there's probably not a good way to stack it. So we now think we have a pretty balanced roster. We're just looking for a time. So by next month, I promise everybody.
It's on the record. No, I'm just teasing it.
I know.
Jared, I know I have a couple of members from my group who have said that they would switch to your group if you do still need members that are not, I don't think any of them are landlords to my knowledge.
Sure.
So I can shoot you their emails if you
That would be
need
great.
people still. If you don't, I think they're fine to stay.
It is still slightly lopsided, but
Okay.
I'd rather get discussion started. But if you have people, I'm happy to
Sure.
share.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
All right. Any dis-
Okay, well, the Housing Committee of the Refugee Resettlement Coalition has identified at least 3 properties in Oneonta that would be slightly below market value for when refugees come. People have also volunteered housing in like Richfield Springs and Cooperstown and everything, but we're aiming to do it in Oneonta because I live in Oneonta. No. Not for that reason, but because the services are here, employment is here. A second choice would be Cooperstown, not someplace like Richfield Springs. It's just transportation would be too difficult to get everything you need. We put in an application to the federal government about 3 months ago for people from Ukraine, and we put in an application this week for other refugees. We don't know how long that's going to take. So some of the properties that we had were no longer available because landlords couldn't keep them open. You know, it's a hurry up and wait process. So that is my whole report.
Any discussion on that?
Thanks, Deb.
So I have the neighborhood improvement group. It feels like we've met a lot recently because we met the past 2 weeks just with a weird schedule. And this is why Jared Goss, I'm curious about maybe collaborating with your group at some point, because it feels like to our group that some of the biggest problems in Oneonta involve rentals, specifically like absentee landlords, which probably wouldn't be people that are on your group and participating. But that's kind of our, I guess, focus of interest right now. We had some correspondence with the Oswego Renaissance Group, which is similar to the Fulton Block Builders project. They had basically said, they had connected us to this consulting firm that helped them get started, CZB. But they had said, you know, if you're really serious about this, we recommend that you kind of have a significant financial investment, which I don't know, which obviously we're just not able to do right now. And to do something like the Fulton Block Builders project, our group doesn't feel like we are equipped to run something like that ourselves. We really like the idea, and I do think it would be awesome in Oneonta, but we feel like it really needs a champion, of which we do not feel fit. So I guess I'm curious, like, in discussion, if anybody has thoughts on that, or if we want to, like, I don't know, propose that something like that happens, but the city interviews people as a champion, or I don't know, puts out like like an RFP, but just, do you want to do this volunteer work where you will not get, you know, where you'll do something really meaningful, but you won't, you know, it's not a job. It probably will require the same amount of time as a job, which I think is why we're shying away from that idea right now. Another thing we're talking about is, and this is going to be controversial, so I'm curious also what people's thoughts are, but I emailed Stephen last week, thank you Stephen, sorry to call you out while you're here, about the number of rentals that we have in the city, and your estimate was that it's around 51% rentals and 49% owner occupied. Am I getting that right? But Center City is much higher, probably 60 to 70% rentals, which is, to me, that seems very imbalanced. And I think, especially with no longer having Center Street School, it seems like Center City is really not attracting families or single family owners. And even like a lot of houses, I think I have 2 on my block or on my street that have sold in the past year that are single family, and now they have like student rental signs in front of them. So what we have been talking about, and I'm curious because I know that some cities have done this with short-term rentals, is like a rental moratorium. So I know that's going to be controversial, so I'm curious to hear people's feedback on that. We talked about, like, would we do it for 3 years, 5 years? What's our proposal? We were talking about also measuring it by percentage of, like, if we get below 30%, then that would be amazing. Or do we do that per ward? because it's obviously like wards 3, 4, and probably 5 are, I don't know what ward 5 is. But I know wards 3 and 4 are really heavily populated with student rentals. It's disproportionately so, it feels like. So that's one thing we're thinking about, or I'm curious to hear feedback from y'all about. Maria is also working on like, and again, Jared, maybe this is something that you would want to come and talk with our group. Maria is looking at like, how do we, is there a way, or does it make sense to register tenants within the city of like, so landlords register how many people they have in each house, and maybe Stephen, I don't even know the legality to that or the code behind that. And the other thing people were talking about was they, I guess we're wondering, again, the legality and maybe ethics behind like having a publicly available document of all the properties that have been reported to be in violation of the city code or that have gotten dinged for that. And I don't want to create more work for the code enforcement office, but I guess that's one thing I'm curious about as well. So that's kind of what our group's thinking about. And I'm very curious to hear what people's thoughts are on the rental moratorium, because I do think that that's controversial. So,
Is there,
I had a question about the Fulton,
yeah.
Fulton Block Builders. Did you have somebody come to your meeting and talk? Okay.
We did. We had, and now I'm gonna
Did
totally.
they have like a PowerPoint or something that you could?
I do, yeah. I can share it with you, and I also we recorded the Zoom,
Okay, yeah.
which may be way too much information, but I can share that PowerPoint with
Yeah, that
everybody.
would be awesome. Thanks.
Because it really is a cool program, and they've done it with essentially no city funding, but the person who's in charge, Linda, is really hustles. Like I don't understand how she has a full-time job on top of this, because it is like, it's so much. But she's really awesome.
Consider a significant financial commitment. That's what the city has to have.
Well, that's what the gentleman in Oswego had said. Because
There's those mini grants, those little grants to do things in neighborhoods. Is that too small ones?
probably these ones are usually what the Fulton Block Builders do is it's I think up to $2,000 of an investment that they'll put in, and then the property owner has to match that. Is my understanding.
Well, 2,000 is not 20,000. I mean, aren't these small grants like 500, 1,000? Aren't they something like that? Carrie, do you know?
They are smaller level grants, they're typically event-based though. So I don't know, we'd have to check with,
Must
Steve.
they be event-based? I mean, is that how that was written?
Typically, yeah.
So it's written they have to be event-based?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't use them for like material improvements.
Right.
Okay. Well, but $2,000 is really a small, I mean, I don't think of that as a really significant financial commitment. I would think there might be some sources of funding if that's all you're looking for.
Well, I
Or
think it's
maybe multiple times you
funding.
need this, but still,
Yeah, their concept is that it's like they improve a whole block, so you apply as a block. So it's like between 5 and 10 houses or 5 and 15 houses that are being awarded at one time.
it doesn't seem like a huge, 5 and 10 houses needing $2,000 is not something I think of as a significant financial commitment.
I think with Oswego, they were talking more about the significant financial investment in the consulting firm, which we wouldn't have to do. The
Well,
Fulton
maybe
Block
we could
Builders
skip
did
the
not.
consulting firm and just use the money to do something.
I agree with you, and I think maybe Deb, you'll be my champion for the city of Oneonta. It just seems like this woman Linda is really doing a ton of work, which is awesome. But she's like organizing all of the volunteers, and she's they don't work as a nonprofit. They distribute all of the checks through another organization, so that's nice because they're not a 501c3. But yeah, it definitely needs somebody who's going to run it essentially with no pay.
Wouldn't the Future for Oneonta Foundation or the Community Foundation of
Yeah.
Otsego County be kind of
Yes.
natural to put on
I think so.
Do you know
for
how-
that amount of money? But then who would apply for it? And I don't think they're in a position to administer those the grant or the money. But they seem like they're a likely owners to confront it.
The community foundation requires that the applying entity be a 501c3. I don't know about Future Moniana Foundation. Do they require that?
I don't have to know.
Well, again, then what you have to do, because this is a situation with our Refugee Resettlement Coalition, which we are not a 501c3, because I know how much work, once you become a 501c3, you know, you have to have bylaws and you have to report to the Attorney General's charity office, you have all these things, so I really don't want to do that. But we have another entity that's, people have given donations to the Community Foundation on behalf of the Refugee Resettlement Coalition, and then another entity is gonna take the money and give it to us. So I don't think any of these are insurmountable. You know, it's a relatively small amount of money. You could, there are so many nonprofits.
And they
You
did some
might be
really
able to
cool.
find one that would, like the Future Boniana Foundation, that would be willing to be the fiscal conduit. That's just ideas.
No, I agree with you. And they did some really cool fundraising where like they had like contractors and local hardware stores like have gifts in kind.
Yes,
Which is really like,
and then they get their name on it. So
yeah,
that's a good thing.
absolutely. It's like a win-win-win.
I have a question about something else.
Yeah.
So, when you're talking about wanting to decrease the number of rentals, are you talking about student rentals and baseball rentals? Because really, a rental per se is not a bad thing. You know, families starting out can't necessarily afford houses, so we're not trying to get, right? I mean,
Yes, I guess, maybe my biggest concern is like there seem to be a ton of old houses in Center City specifically that are just haphazardly chopped up into, and like gray laminate flooring is slapped down, and now we're making.
and who are they renting to? Are they renting to?
I think it's typically students. And I think it's amazing to have students in our neighborhood. Like, I think students are not the issue. I think the
But they're not per se
landlords-
bad, but they're transient renters, and that's not what we want, but it's,
Right. Well, and I think like there's definitely an increase in trash. Like I'm picking up beer cans off my lawn regularly in Center City, which I think people on like Woodside Ave or even like the Chestnut Street, like near Greater Plains, are not dealing with.
and it's also the quality of the rentals. I mean, students,
Yes, that's my
you know, student
ultimate
rental
concern.
housing is not, they figure, oh, what do they care? They're gonna be leaving, which makes them not have a real stake in the neighborhood, but it wouldn't. If we could have quality rentals, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, and if we could increase the quality of rentals in a way, and to me, it almost seems like the bottom line is that, and this is not all landlords, but it seems like a lot of landlords are doing this to make money, so they are
This is
doing the
ridiculous.
littlest
Well,
amount.
I'm gonna jump in here today.
Yeah, no, and this is not at all like against landlords necessarily, but there are landlords in the city that probably own 40 properties or more, which is,
Definitely more.
I also feel like there's an imbalance of
80,
like
yeah, 80.
first-time home buyers are getting bought out because they get bought out by cash buyers, and so now we just have all these sometimes like empty rental houses. Like the orange house up the street from me, I believe, looks to be empty.
It's funny you just said that exact sentence, so, my experience here. I live in a rental house right now. I've lived with, I'm not gonna name drop if that's okay, but, I've lived with this landlord for 7 years, and he's like, sorry, I'm not gonna re-rent to you, I need to rent to students. By the way, he wants to rent the attic, which is unheated and, doesn't have,
Nice.
as the fourth bedroom.
Tell me his name.
Tell me after.
He's not gonna name drop, but he's gonna.
Off the
I'm not
record,
gonna say
name
her name,
drop.
but, you know, just do research.
But here's my address.
So, which is not, you know, you can look it up, I'm just,
Yeah.
exactly.
I don't know.
So, okay, fine, so I go to, me and my wife talk, we're gonna buy a house, we should buy a house anyway. Twice, we put offers on houses, they were higher than the actual purchase price that was made, but they were cash buyers from investors. We eventually did buy a house, but we had a discussion, we're like, you know, are we gonna stay?
Yeah.
It was difficult, you know? So that's just my own personal experience of the last few months. Your rental moratorium question.
You feel free to rip it apart.
No, I'm not against it at all. I mean, 51% is not a viable number. And there are a lot of bad landlords. okay?
Yes, and that's, oof, my biggest.
Well, and full disclosure, I own a rental house. Okay,
Yeah.
just so everyone knows, but, you know, there's a level of, I say to my wife all the time, you know, we're not just trying to rake money out of these people. This is their home. I rent to students downstairs and I rent to local family upstairs.
And people deserve quality housing, no matter who you
Yeah,
are.
that's-
Everybody deserves quality housing, which is not what a lot of.
And I'm not trying to, you know, self-pontificate here, but there's a mentality that, you know, I know this person who's an absentee landlord who couldn't be a part of my group because he's absentee. You know, he lives in New Jersey, he bought a house and he's trying to rent for as much money as possible. I mean, he put carpet in the bathroom just because it's the cheapest thing. You know what I mean? It's like, there's this mentality that we can just take advantage of these kids because no one cares. But you know what? There are neighbors involved. So I'm not opposed to a rental moratorium because that percentage is too high. Also, there is an enrollment cliff coming, which I think I mentioned in the last meeting. It's going to become harder and harder for student landlords to rent to students. This year especially is the worst year on record for student landlords, kind of by far. Like,
In what way?
the pre-lease percentages, these guys all rent the year before for the next year. So they're down, I'd say on average, I'm gonna guess, 40% year over year. That's a lot, you know, and why that is it's not just due to declining enrollment, but, you know, the market's changed, so they're more choosy, you know. So I'm not saying that issue will fix itself because, and it's difficult to legislate, like, hey, you have to fix your house tomorrow kind of thing, but,
Right.
you know, there will hopefully, I think, be a little bit of market-driven forces that will fix some of that issue. For the code enforcement list, and by the way, if I start talking trash, just tap me on the shoulder here. There was, and I know we just changed it, Steve, there was a website, Municity 5, that you could look up a property and you see all its outstanding code violations. On the whole, I'm okay with that too personally. My only issue there is, you know, if the code gets updated, and then you have a code inspection, you know, the next week, the code office comes, and they say, hey, you have to update that, the carbon monoxide detector action now needs to be 20 inches off the floor, not 16. So you gotta fix that. So they write it up. I don't know if that appears immediately, but it's not that, because that owner could have done everything they needed to do, but it shows up as a potential violation, and then, so I have a little reticence with that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I think we were focusing more on like the exterior stuff, like people were very concerned about garbage cans, peeling paint, unmowed grass. These are the big things, and the unshoveled sidewalks right now, because we're seeing that. And Steven's talked with our group very generously, and probably ad nauseum for him. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's a great point, because I don't, not that I don't care if it's 6 more inches with the fire detector, but like that's not really the purpose, I guess.
Like, I think a better mechanism rather than having some sort of public forum to show all the outstanding code violations, of which some of these properties are gonna have a lot, okay? Not that I need to tell you that. But I think it might be maybe slightly more beneficial to start with something like, who doesn't have their COC that is renting? You know, or what buildings just don't have their COC that might be renting, have historically been renting? Because that's the big one, because they're not just gonna take your COC because you need to update code, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's gotta be a number of things, if I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
You look like you have a question or a comment.
Yeah, did you find any precedent for the moratorium?
Only for short-term rentals, and that's where I would be very curious about like the legal perspective of something like
Yeah.
that.
It seems like it would be pretty hard, based on the
Yes.
conversations we've had in the past, and to make that happen.
Yeah.
Seems like that we're hopefully think that market forces are going to make it happen.
Right.
Yeah, and let me step back a little. 51% of a transient population, that's the problem. I think you mentioned too, if it were long-term people, okay, now we're talking. I don't think that's untenable, but a transient population, that becomes an issue. you know, most Saturdays I'm picking cans off my front lawn.
Right.
You know, I mean, I don't love it.
Right.
But
And I just think like, I would love to have families renting in my neighborhood, but so many of them are like, these houses are like chopped up that they're almost like 1 or 2 bedrooms, I would assume. I don't actually know. So I don't know how feasible that is, but, and I think there's also like, and I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like are there challenges, Steve, with like, you can't really restrict who a landlord would rent to within, like that feels dicey, yeah.
But there are cases where people are selling houses and want to sell only to, don't want to sell for rental, student rental properties.
Yeah.
And, well, I had someone called me, a friend called me about a month ago and said that he and his wife wanted to sell their house, but didn't want to sell it for anything but somebody who would live in it, you know, purchase it, live in it. And, you know, they have 3 houses, so this was in 3 different places in New York. So anyway, I recommended a realtor to them. Realtor knew what they were looking for, and they already have somebody lined up, who I happen to recommend to them, because somebody was looking for a house.
Should
And,
get commission.
yeah, so it kind of happened off market, you know. That's not the right word, but, you know, off the record. And I don't think there's anything illegal about that, especially trying to comply. Like, well, you probably know about Kay Stuhler Gross when she sold their house on Walnut. She waited like 2 or 3 years to sell the house because she was determined to sell it to somebody who wasn't going to rent it out to students.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many people there are who might be willing to take a loss, so it's not a bidding war or something with
Right.
an absentee landlord.
Yeah, I tried to do a private sale before we bought the house that we ended up buying, and now that house that we tried to do a private sale is a student rental. So, it's just sad. And I think for me, and I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but like, my biggest beef, I guess, with the landlords or the absentee landlords is like the lack of care to these buildings, because so many around the city just look uncared for. And yeah, that's my biggest thing, is like the property
So
maintenance.
what happens if they get cited for things like, I don't know what they get cited for, I have to shovel the walk, but there must be other things, right? What happens then?
This is probably a Steve
What
question.
happens when
They
they get
go to
cited?
court, and the judge decides if he's gonna levy a fine against them. And if they decides not to levy a fine, then we just keep going back to court over and over again.
Do they show up for these court appearances, or they just send their lawyer who?
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of non-absentee landlords in Oneonta. So the fact that we're referring to them as absentee landlords, there's plenty of landlords that live right in this area that are
Not taking care of things.
amazingly joyful to deal with. Like they're not all absentee landlords that live in New Jersey. There's plenty of them right here in Otsego County. Yeah, so they show up in court and we run around for 6 months, and sometimes they get a fine and sometimes they don't. And we just,
And the fine is their cost of doing business, so they don't have any about it?
I've yet to see the 15 days in jail or $1,000 ever be fully levied against someone for feeling pain. I mean, that's the honest truth. So the state of New York allows us to put someone in jail for 15 days or up to $1,000 per day of violation. And if the judge isn't gonna enforce that, then that's
Right, then there's
on
really
the judge.
no
so-
incentive for them to really make much improvements.
So what we have to do is we have to do an elaborate workaround where we levy administrative fees on properties. And that is a fee structure that exists in the code office. We levy over $100,000 a year in fees against landlords for various violations. Some of those fees are, we have one person that got a $30,000 tax free levy from administrative fees. they are trying to figure out how to pay that right now. So, yeah. That is how. it
Creative
works.
solutions.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can levy fees and you can go to court. Some code violations we correct, so shoveling snow, we have a guy that works 30 hours a week doing nothing but shoveling snow and mowing lawns, so, that's his whole time, I mean, that's his 30-hour-a-week job, is shoveling sidewalks and mowing lawns.
And do the fines pay for his salary and benefits?
120, well, he doesn't get, he's a part-time employee, works 30 hours a week.
So he's subcontracted.
No, he's
Subcontracted?
No, he's-
part-time,
He's a part-time city
so he's not
City
getting
employee.
benefits.
Oh, he's not.
It's not getting benefits, but every time we shovel sidewalks, it's $125, whether it's 10 feet of sidewalk or 30. So every time we mow lawns, $125. Every time we move the trash cans, $125. And he does that 30 hours a week. But there's a lot of garbage, there's a lot of trash cans, there's a lot of snow.
I think if we looked at a land value tax, that might help, right? Because it taxes the value of land, so, as opposed to the property, right? So if a landlord doesn't have an incentive to update their property, because then their property taxes go up, because the value goes up. But if we tax the land, a landlord who owns 50 houses and they're all trash, we're taxing the value of the land, which is at that point significantly higher than the property, the structure.
Do we tax?
Really?
Really?
Yeah, that would be a split rate tax. So, I think some municipalities in Pennsylvania have a split rate tax.
Well, when properties are assessed, they assess the value of the land and the value of the building.
Which is essentially split rate.
Isn't that what we do?
It would be a higher percentage.
Are you
Yeah.
suggesting we do it higher? Because it is set up that way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's how taxes are assessed, but a land value tax is an entirely different tax structure that has to be, I mean, that would be something the county would have to be involved in.
I like the idea though, and I assume that would generate more, maybe just different income, might not generate anything more.
I mean, the only major thing that we've done recently was we passed an exterior property maintenance local ordinance that removed the requirement for us to send notices every time we did work. So the way the structure worked before, we have to send a notice, notify a violation before we can mow a lawn. Now we send one notice annually, and if we go by your house, after you receive that annual notice and you have 12-inch grass, we just mow it. We're not gonna continue to send
Warnings.
warnings.
Yeah.
We got into the landscaping business.
I guess the other thing, kind of to Stephen and Jared's point, like, my hope is not to make it difficult for landlords who live in the city and own like 1 or 2 investment properties and take care of their property. It's the people that own upwards of like 80 properties that, to me, just feels unbalanced, is the word I'm gonna keep using. So we were also wondering, and again, I don't know the legality of this or the process of this, but like, would there be a way to like tax or fee or create some sort of, well, I guess structure for landlords who own, say they own 10 properties, so on your 11th property that you own, you're in a different like tax structure or a different fee structure. Does that make sense? So it's like the more properties you own, it's almost like you're getting dinged.
I mean, I think the problem you're gonna run into is some of our worst property owners own 2 houses. So like, for example, I'm just gonna throw some names around, Prime Student Rental. His properties are in significantly better condition than some of our local, I own 1 or 2 house guys, who rent not to students, but rent to local people. I mean, the Oneonta Hotel, when it was occupied, was owned by a local person that lived on Maple Street, and,
Yes.
it was a nightmare, so they owned one building. So yeah, it's hard because I've gone into many rental properties and there's a lot of really bad student rentals, but there's a lot of really bad not student rentals as well. And that's where it gets kind of tricky to,
Right, just define them by student or non-student,
yeah,
yeah.
I,
Yeah.
because local people get into weird, nasty stuff too.
I,
Oh, I'm sure.
I think our goal, at the end of the day, our goal though is to I guess, maximize the number of available properties to year-round, full-time residents, right? So, I mean, property condition is just one factor, but there are a lot of other factors too to consider.
Yeah, I was thinking of like smart growth and how that plays in, because I know, I mean, isn't some of your charge to like have the most amount of people in a, like in Center City or close to downtown, like is that part of it, or?
So, I guess, yeah, well, in general, smart growth is about increasing density. You know, near Center City makes the most sense. You know, personally, I would argue we have the density, we're just not utilizing it in a way that benefits full-time residents. I mean, we have, the numbers are there, we have more rental units than we need. It's just, they're just not being rented to full-time residents. So,
Well, maybe one of our goals should also be that all housing is safe and good quality. I mean, we don't want the students in dangerous, unsafe housing either. It's just that landlords feel like they can get away with it for the students. So, you know, if we truly fulfilled our mission, those would be improved as well.
Yes, absolutely, I agree with you.
That's
We
the
do
tricky
find
part.
it interesting though that some people choose to live in unsafe housing.
Is it a price-driven thing, you think?
Yeah, I think it's
With the
different.
students, it's just, I wanna live with my friends, so I don't care if I'm sleeping in an attic. With the not student population, it's just kind of a whatever, it's, I'm here, I'm not paying my rent, maybe just squatting in a basement, for example. I mean, we have units that, like, they're unsafe, they're whatever, we've notified the tenants, they just choose not to leave. And then we have to go to court, and we have to get some sort of order for the landlord to evict the tenants. I mean, you'd be surprised how hard it is to get people out of housing that's unsafe that they wanna be in.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, that probably brings up a whole bunch of other issues that really go beyond the scope of this committee, like mental health issues and,
Yes.
you know, lack of other resources, and sometimes people, they don't really wanna be there, but if their option is being on the street, then this is better, so, you know,
Drugs.
I don't think that takes away from the fact that we should be aiming to have everybody in safe, quality housing.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about, in this conversation, about how the majority of the land in Oneonta is owned by nonprofits. So, and how does, and the fact that they don't pay taxes, how does that work with, when we keep hearing from the city about not having enough money? And it's been harder to raise taxes in the last 10 years. What if there were a curb tax and there was more money coming into the city that could be used for the kind of programs that we're talking about? You know, Steve, if that's going anywhere, curb taxes, or is that not?
What's a curb tax?
That, where everybody, even nonprofits, would pay an amount based on the amount of land they have facing the street, to cover things like police and fire and
Oh.
snow, et cetera. Makes a heck of a lot of sense, but you can't just snap your fingers and have it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I know that was brought up. We didn't have like a rush at the door to here for that. Dave Merzig, I think, was looking into that.
Yeah, I know we looked into it when I was on council too.
But is lack of funds the main problem? I mean, how would that help with all these privately owned properties that,
I think they're, well, my take is that they're separate issues, but if 49% of, like, the property owners are paying like 100% of the taxes, I feel like, and I might not get those percentages
Yeah, I
right.
think it's 53, 47 or something like that.
Yeah.
Last time I
You think it wouldn't hurt?
Yeah, more
Yeah,
money.
because there could be more people in staff in code enforcement, for example.
Right.
And that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it
no.
normal, and maybe someone can tell me, is it normal to not tax colleges because they're nonprofit in other cities?
yeah,
Okay. On the
They try
record.
to get payment in lieu of taxes, try to, like, I think places like Syracuse and Colgate, et cetera, pay a certain amount of money every year, just because, well, I guess they probably have it more than other colleges do, they're willing to support the community by putting money into the city hall. But it hasn't really worked here on the,
I like the curb tax idea. You said when you were on council that was discussed?
yeah, and I wasn't on the committee that dealt with that, but I don't remember what stopped it from happening. But like I say, it's not the kind of thing that you can just decide at a
Enact.
common council meeting that you want to have a curb tax.
Right,
It has to go through the state too.
yeah. Well, I feel like I really monopolized that half an hour, so I will pass this on to you if no one else has anything that they wanna add.
Yeah, the Affordable Housing Group didn't meet. We were scheduled for the second Monday
Okay.
of the month, and just the way it fell this month, it's not before this meeting, so
Totally fair.
I have no report.
Well, thank you very much.
Senior Housing Work Group met last Thursday. I was out of the area, so I didn't attend, but I got the draft minutes of the meeting, and it really focused on the senior housing focus group meeting that we're planning for later in March. It's going to be on March 17th, Friday, St. Patrick's Day, 1 p.m. at the Boys and Girls Club. And we had 85, a lot of the discussion will be based on the results of the housing survey that we put out. We had 85 responses, which there could have been more, but that's not too bad. It was interesting to note that a great majority put as a number one priority how they wanted to age, where they wanted to age was to remain in their own homes. So one of the topics of this meeting will be, in fact, the kind of the theme of the meeting is housing options to age in place. But that's, I think, it's a little broader than just remaining in your own home, but other ways that people could have some good quality of life. So we've tried to get a diverse group of people together for this meeting, and if anyone in your group, either you or somebody else in the group would like to attend, that'd be great. I'd like to kind of finalize the numbers pretty soon, but Tammy Reed or I can take people's names and get back in touch with them to get a little more information. So if you know of anybody that might like to be part of a small group discussion on how we should focus our attention, and specifically about how to keep people in their homes with possibly home and property maintenance help and that sort of thing. Also, affordability, of course, was a factor, but it was things that people were worried about were affordability and maintenance, and lesser social isolation and transportation. Felt like those two things, social isolation and transportation, are things that we have a decent network for in the county. It's mostly that people don't know about them very as much as they should. So, yeah, let me know if you know of somebody who might be a good person to go to get this meeting as soon as possible. Again, it's on St. Patrick's Day, and it's gonna be, maybe an hour and a half, something like that, to try to give us, make sure that we're not going off somewhere with an idea that really doesn't have people invested in it. That's it. Any questions?
I will follow up with my work group, to see if any of them wanna attend that meeting, cause that would be great, I think.
Thanks.
Do people need to RSVP for that?
Well, I think they don't, I don't think they have to, but it would be good for us, either Tammy or Raj, and know that who's coming. We do want to keep it fairly small. We don't want to put out a broadcast that there's this meeting and have 50 people come and then turn it into something that doesn't really lend itself to good discussion. So, yeah, but ideally in the next few days, if we just have person's name and they could be sent some information, name and contact information, send some information about the way the meeting's going to go. Thanks.
Does anyone have discussion about anything that was discussed? A lot of discussion.
Yeah, I would like to request that someone from OFO come to this group and tell us about their $750,000 housing assistance grant.
And did you say you have a contact with Dan Maskin, or?
I can send him an email.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think it's also Will Rivera is the, he runs a number of the housing programs, so he might be the person, but.
Yeah, that'd be great. Could you just let me know if they say yes?
I'll put it on the agenda.
Yep.
Okay. The only thing I wanted to add was Mark had sent me an email because he couldn't be here and said to ask everybody to check the area of the All for Oneonta website just to make sure that everything that from your group is up to date. And then if you send him something, just indicate that you want it to be posted, cause he's not sure if he's missing something.
And I wanted to talk about the housing compact a little bit anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
And can you ask Mark, I asked him this, he said he'd get back to us, what entrance we're supposed to meet tomorrow? There's a lot of doors, really.
Good point.
I
Oh,
don't know
right, the
which
Lofts on
door.
Dietz. I was like, where are we tomorrow?
So he said he would find out and get back to us, so maybe he'd like let us all know, so we're all not just like walking around and standing at different entrances.
Perfect. Yeah, he didn't say anything about that. He just said, we'll meet at 5:30 at the Dietz Street Lofts for a tour tomorrow. So I can send him an email with all of you copied and just see.
Hey, so we're fine.
No, I mean, there's
So
only-
can we see who?
there's
Yes.
only
Find out
We
who
have an
else
audience
is?
member. Are you here to
Oh.
talk? I'm so sorry. We've been like chatting away.
Oh no, it's no problem. I'm a Hartwick student with the political science group. I'm doing an internship, and we just come to a lot of meetings. And I'm just here to take notes, listen
This is
in.
Dr. Elder's class?
Yes, Professor Alder. And yeah,
Awesome. What is your name?
Cynia, but Nia's fine.
Nice to meet you, Cynia. Thanks for being here.
Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, you are a college student. I mean, this is who we want to hear from.
I found like the rental conversation interesting because 90% of what me and my friends do when we walk around is look at the houses and judge them. So
Thank you for this.
and 90% of the time this has a lot of potential, but it looks ragged. So I just found all of that interesting. The carpet in the bathroom made me want to throw up.
Yeah.
I could actually say, it came with carpet in the bathroom that he chose not to change for a very long time.
See,
Okay.
that's just like,
Debatably worse, yeah.
yeah.
Let's just be more correct about it. It has since been changed, but, anyway,
Oh my goodness.
it took a while.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that input. Because our college students, I think, largely do care about the community, and I hope that y'all feel like community members.
I mean, yeah, I go to Hartwick, so we're really not allowed to live in Oneonta. Unfortunately, that's like all Suco kids. But, I mean, it needs a lot of work, but the houses here are great, and I think it should be more of a permanent resident type place. as much as a college town as it is.
Right. Right, we can have a nice balance, hopefully. All
Do
right.
you think the college student, when you all walk around, you say, gee, I want to live here after college? And if not, what could we do to make you feel that way?
Honestly, I would want to live here now. It's not an automatic turn off of, oh, I don't want to be here again. That's just a general feeling of New York, since most of us are from upstate New York. But our biggest problems aren't the house, it's also the transportation that's deeply upsetting, especially as a freshman, which was like mentioned briefly at the beginning. But it's just the mix of that. I'd say no, it doesn't feel like the type of place you'd want to be permanently, unfortunately. At least not like this part of town. Like I've been into like deeper Oneonta by like the high school and stuff, and they seemed lived in and comfortable.
Lived in. Exactly.
Is there something you might be missing?
What do you?
Well, I mean, as you look around, as you're interfacing with downtown, or just whatever you're interfacing with, for that matter, you know, is it a lack of shopping, restaurants, things to do?
It's
You know,
just
is
that
there a lack of
everything.
something?
I like Main Street downtown. It's like very much like Ithaca, which is where I'm like from originally, and I appreciate that. I like that. It's mainly that all the bigger things are on the other side of town, and that just goes back to the transportation
So
part
you're
of
like
it.
the mall.
South side.
Yeah, like just getting to Walmart, you know,
Yeah.
that's like terrible. You can only get there at a time that's convenient for us, Friday and Saturday nights, and then you're walking past like the group's kids and, you know, picking up cans off of your lawn on Saturday mornings. Yep, we see the prelude to that. So it just like folds in on top of each other, and it's pretty obvious to see what's going on. I didn't realize that so many of the rentals though were only for students, as many rentals as they are. That's kind of depressing since the houses are so nice. There's so many wizard towers. I love them.
For one school, we're not even counting Hartwick, because you guys can't live off campus.
Exactly. It's only for SUNY students, and there's a lot of them, but I
Yeah,
don't
obviously
think
it's a
that
bigger school, but you know, there's enough Hartwick students, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a lot more kids would live off campus if they allowed us to, but I feel like that's the reason they don't.
No, the reason is they're
I think they
nonprofit
built the
making money.
buildings and they couldn't fill them, because Hartwick students used to be able to live off campus until they had this huge building project, and then they couldn't fill them, that's why they make you go back.
And that's kind of what SUNY is thinking of now, as they've got more students working online, that they've got empty rooms
Yeah,
they're going to want to be filling, so.
Well, that would actually be
That might be
help
positive.
solve our problems.
One of the tangential sort of things to this commission that's going on now is the city's trying to start a welcome wagon program, you know, about welcoming newcomers, including hope that students will, when they graduate, decide to stay here for a while, as many students have over the years. But they're going to have quarterly meetings, I think, and the first one's April 14, 4 to 6 p.m. Unfortunately, it's not in the city of Oneonta, it's going to be the town of Oneonta. But there's going to be people to kind of welcome people.
Well, you know,
might
if you're
recently-
going to that, maybe that's something that should be mentioned.
Pardon?
Maybe that should be mentioned, we're on the assumption that everybody has a car. So, a meeting like that should be in some place that's walkable.
I agree.
Well, maybe you could bring, are you going to a meeting? You might mention that.
Yeah, I'm not part of the group at all, but I've been asked to be at this event to talk about Oneonta history and stuff like that for people.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your input. Thanks for being willing to just like jump in there. I
No
love
problem.
that.
Okay, housing compact.
Yes. Take it away, Bob.
Please. Well, when the governor's housing compact proposal came up, it seemed like there was quite a bit in the papers and not just the local papers, but on what it might mean. And then the mayor went to the mayor's conference, came back, and sounded pretty concerned about it. But then there was something he wrote in his column that I felt like he had changed his mind, and maybe I was misinterpreting things, so I don't know how far the conversation can go without him being here, but Steve, what's your read on this?
I mean, the big push that everyone's obviously aware of is the change to the localized portion of zoning where they are trying to increase density, which, I mean, I think that kind of what Jared said, we already have a fairly dense center city. I believe that long-term, we're gonna move away from single-family zones. So I think that we recently updated the zoning code to essentially grandfather in all of our multi-unit houses in the single-family zoning district. And I think that'll kind of, long-term, I think that'll be kind of an exchange.
So are you saying that we wouldn't be terribly affected by?
I don't think we're gonna be terribly affected by it, because I think that long-term,
Either positive or negative?
yeah, I mean, I don't see where if we had strong development pressure, we already have zones in the city where you could buy single-family homes, bulldoze them, and build multi-unit houses as of right. So there's no, in places like, Portland, Oregon, where there's massive amounts of development pressure, that's what happens. The fact that in Oneonta, no one's doing that, that's an indication that there's not that much development pressure. So I think that places like Long Island are gonna be hit really hard by this. I think like suburbs around the city will be hit really, and by hit really hard, I mean, I think that they're historically single-family zoning schemes that they kind of stick to, I think those are gonna be really impacted. I think as you move upstate where we don't have that type of development pressure, I think it's gonna be kind of a wash. So yeah, I mean, cause we already have, I mean, all of Chestnut Street, you could bulldoze and build, 8-story buildings if you wanted to.
Mm.
The fact that we have a speedway, at the intersection of Lettuce Highway
Except
and
in the
Main.
historic district on Chestnut Street.
The fact that we have a speedway, like that is indicative of a lack of general interest in the amount of parking lots we have. I mean, I don't think it's gonna be big.
By the way, Jesse Ravage's resource study, you've seen the draft of it, I guess?
I'm meeting with her on the 16th.
Yeah, and that project funded by the Preservation League, that Otsego 2000 grant, is effectively completed in this stage. So the next stage would be expanding making applications to the State Historic Preservation Office to expand the districts or add more properties. And I hope that would be a deterrent to bulldozing Chestnut Street anyway for projects, because
Yeah.
the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself from
No,
things
you're
I've said
great.
over the months, but has been encouraging Oneonta to expand those districts, because we're in a fairly unique position of having so many houses built all at the same time. And as Ed May says, every time you give him a chance, there's only been 6 new houses built in Oneonta in the last 50 years or something like that.
I've been saying 5. Is that correct?
Well, I might be misquoting.
550 sounds better.
What Ed leaves out is we built almost 100 new housing units though.
Pardon?
What Ed leaves out is that we built almost 100 new housing units in the last 3 years.
Right. Yeah, he's talking about single-family housing.
He's talking about the stuff the governor doesn't want to see built.
Right.
Does anyone have any hot takes on that, or Bob, I guess, do you?
Oh, on the proposal?
Yeah,
I don't know enough to know what to think, I guess, to which I was hoping to appreciate what you're saying, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically a big, what this is a result of is a large push in suburban areas around New York City that are not building housing units, that there's a high demand for housing units in, to stop essentially like NIMBYing multifamily housing.
But it seems like we're gonna, from what the mayor said or wrote, we have to opt out of something in order to.
There's like these housing growth, you're supposed to build a certain percentage of new housing units, and you can opt out, or you can meet those goals through various kind of workarounds, which I think we'll be able to do very easily because we don't have that bill pressure.
Well, does anyone else have anything that they wanna talk about in discussion?
I think I do. I just want to add to the, I think my sort of personal anecdote, it doesn't necessarily go to any one particular point, but we did have a lot of houses built at the same time, and there are a lot of houses that haven't been maintained. And as I was looking for a house, I mean, even since I bought my house, there hasn't been anything that came on the market that I would even entertain, due to its state of disrepair. Or, on the other side, you get, you know, something on the other side of Walmart for $850,000, and it's gorgeous, but, you know, there's a house on Chestnut Street, there's 90 Chestnut, or not Chestnut, sorry, Spruce Street, $100,000, nice and affordable, piece of crap. You know, so it doesn't attract a buyer, you know. To fix that up, it costs $100,000, and I'd say for a lot of people, not everybody, but let's say enough people, $200,000 for a house is not unattainable, but do you have a spare $100,000 laying around? I don't have an answer to this, I'm just saying because the housing stock is old and hasn't been maintained for so long, even if it were to go back to private hands, it might be a difficult sell, so the people who own the houses might have to take a bit of a loss on them,
Yeah.
which is just gonna be difficult, so I'm just kinda adding some 2 cents there.
And that made me think of the recent article about the county taking over some properties, including at least one in Oneonta, right? And and
No,
how-
the land bank took two.
Land bank.
Is one Alpha
Okay.
Delta Omega?
62, we took the old
Oh,
Alpha
on Elm
Delta
Street, yeah.
house, and we took.
Pardon?
We took the old Alpha Delta.
The one that you and I went
Omega.
through? Yep, yep.
The AEO house, and we took 50 out, so those were officially transferred.
In my neighborhood.
Yeah, 2 of them. But those are both in pretty bad shape. I mean, that would be a labor of love, which I would gladly take on.
Yeah, you would be the perfect steward of a house like
If I
that.
wasn't in the middle of one already.
Yeah, me too. Well, I think Jared, to your point, like, I wanted a house that needed that level of work, but I think that is not the norm at all. Like, I almost wonder if, I don't know.
What's
Because it-
not the norm, sorry?
like, it's not the norm to wanna put
Oh, yeah, yeah.
a large amount of money into this house that basically you're undoing all of the 70s.
Well, and even if you
upgrades.
want to, can you?
Right.
I mean, because the bank won't loan you an extra $100,000 on your $100,000 house to make improvements. It'll probably be worth 200,000 DM, but they're not taking a chance on it. You're not a developer.
And we were looking at, like, there are some incentive programs for historic houses in places like Collinswood, New Jersey, and I don't even remember, I think Madison, Wisconsin was one. And so that's something our group is talking about a little bit, but again, I don't know where that money would necessarily come from. Maybe it is like FOF and the Community Foundation.
Well, I think part of the expansion of the historic district, I mean, those tax credits are incentive to doing improvements. I mean, but they're tax credits, so they're
The
out of
future.
pocket and you get it in the future.
Yeah.
I was wondering with the historic districts, so I know one of the houses that comes up in our discussion is on Walnut Street and it's within that historic district, but it does seem to, at least on the outside, feels like it has a lot of code violations. So,
Carl's house.
yeah, I guess I just wonder, like, within the historic district, does that really protect these houses?
No.
Yeah.
You can bulldoze a house in the historic district. It's honorific. Unfortunately, we passed a historic preservation ordinance, we just don't have anyone on the board yet. So, we have a pretty extreme, I mean, I don't wanna say extreme. We have an ordinance that was approved through SHPO that has stringent requirements for how these places are supposed to be maintained. We just can't use it until we get the board.
And then, like, what happens if those restrictions, I guess, are not met? Like, what if the property is
$1,000
not?
a day, 15 days in jail, go to court.
Which
I
doesn't
mean-
happen, they're just saying.
Well, I mean, we take people to court.
The jail and the.
Oh, yeah. So I think the problem, I'm not gonna say the problem, I think what happens is, if there's pressure and there's community support for those things to be enforced, the courts react accordingly, so the city of Oneonta hadn't taken any, I mean, I took over going on 7 years ago, and before that, we hadn't taken anyone to court in almost a decade. So, we had to figure out how to take people to court again, and the court had to figure out how to handle code violations.
And is that the city court?
Yep.
What court is it? Okay.
City court.
And this program that Steve was talking about is the Certified Local Government Program.
Mm-hmm. I
And
remember reading
kind
that.
of, kind of an innocuous name, but it will get some teeth to preservation.
Good. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
You just have to get people on the board. We need 7 people on the board.
How many,
I kept talking to Mayor Drenick.
Is the answer 0?
He's the appointer of boards and commissions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll let my folks know, just on my work group. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to discuss before we close out? Motion to adjourn? Jared,
second.
thank you. Do we have to do a roll call